Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to part 2 of a special educational event on aligning your money with your values. We're starting exactly 2 minutes late, but I couldn't talk over Pink Floyd. My name is Anne-Christine Strugnell, and I'm the Communications Director of the Environmental Forum of Marin, EFM. EFM was founded almost 50 years ago to educate people in Marin about the environment of this beautiful place and to inspire them to take personal and political action to protect it. We're based in Marin County, which is on the unceded traditional homelands of the Coast Miwok people. Before we start, I want to take a moment to thank our sponsor, the Marin Community Foundation. Your registration fee, which thank you for that, covers only part of the cost of putting on these events, so we rely on sponsors to help keep this show on the road. During this talk, as I said at the start of the previous webinar, I often MC webinars for EFM, but this one is different for me because it's inspired by my personal journey. As I said last week, when I first realized that climate change threatened everything I loved, I felt like we should all be working all day, every day to avert the climate crisis. I still feel that way. But obviously, we can't vote, go to protests, or send hundreds of dollars to causes we care about every single day. But what we can do is make sure that our finances align with our values. Money is power, and without necessarily spending more or investing more, you can shift both your spending and your investing to basically vote your values every day. As we learned last week, this can be complicated. You can go to a protest about fracking while you're carrying a credit card from a major bank that uses your money to finance fracking, and you might not even be aware of that. I have literally been there and done that. Since then, I've learned a lot about the many ways in which we're usually kept in the dark about the true consequences of our financial choices. And I've put together this 2-part webinar to share with you the steps I've taken in my financial journey in the hope that you'll be able to learn from my experience. So last week, we focused on spending with terrific presenters who talked about how so many spending decisions can either support or contradict your values. I hope you came away with a better understanding of why it matters what you buy, where you buy it from, which bank you use, and how to evaluate the return on investment of upgrading your home or car. I hope you were inspired to take some actions. I finished the process of switching banks, so I'm feeling good. I have to explain, I actually switched from Wells Fargo a couple of years ago, but I fell for a greenwashing bank, and so now I've switched to a better one. So it can be hard to find. It is still hard to figure out what's really happening behind the scenes with money. But this week I'm shifting focus from spending to investing. Even if you aren't currently an investor, stick around because you can help influence the investment choices of people you know and organizations you're affiliated with, such as your school or workplace. So let's review the agenda. First, we are going to hear Andrew Bahar, the CEO of asyousow.org, talking about your power as an investor and how to use it. Next up, we're going to get some insight into how a financial planner goes about greening a portfolio from Patrick Costello, who is a graduate of EFM's Masterclass, a certified financial planner, and the founder of Green River Sustainable Financial Services. Then we're going to hear about easy and tax-smart ways to leave a green legacy from Bonnie Landless-Dowling, Esquire. She's a lawyer at Keegan Harrison LLP in San Rafael. So, as I said, this program reflects my own journey, and at one step of this journey, I became confused because on the one hand, some environmentalists I deeply admire, like Bill McKibben, were advising divesting from certain companies such as fossil fuel companies. Makes sense, right? But on the other hand, I read about the shareholder rebellion that forced Exxon to change course. So if those people had not been shareholders, they would not have been in the room where it happens. So my question is, as people with some money to invest or some influence over investments, how can we be most powerful in bringing about the change we want to see in the world? I'm really looking forward to hearing the answer to that question from Andrew Bahar, the CEO of asyousow.org, and the author of a book called The Shareholder Action Guide, Unlock Your Hidden Powers to Hold Corporations Accountable. Andrew is going to tell us about our hidden powers in just a moment, but first, he has a few questions he'd like to ask. Can you put up the poll, Leah? Aha, okay. So he'd like to know whether you have any of the following. Check all that apply. Investments in equities, investments in mutual funds, investments in a corporate 401k plan. And if so, have you done any of the following? Do you vote your proxies? And have you ever been involved in a direct engagement with a company, such as going to a shareholder meeting? So let's take a moment to get some answers to those questions so that Andrew has a better sense of where to begin. Okay, well, those are some great numbers. So what we have is 92% of you are invested in equities, 85 in mutual funds, 38% in a corporate plan, 85% of you are voting your proxies, and 23% have been involved in direct engagement with the company. So what do you think of that? Andrew, can you take it away?
Yeah, I'm impressed, frankly. That's a big number for people who particularly have voted their proxies, because most individuals do not. It's only about maybe 30% of people actually vote their proxies, as far as we know. But we can talk about that. I'm glad to see people have equities. As few people have engaged with corporations. And I'm going to take you through a slide deck and then also show you some tools that we have on the As You Sow website that can help you to understand what you own, particularly in mutual funds, because mutual funds are a pretty big mystery. There's not a lot of information about what's inside these baskets of stocks. So I'm going to talk about shareholder power, because shareholders have a huge amount of power and most people do not realize it. I'll talk a little bit about As You Sow and about being an empowered shareholder. This idea of stakeholder capitalism, which is a very new concept, and yet it is a very old concept. It's just now been embraced by all corporations. And about knowing what you own, which is what I'll show you some tools. So I always start, so As You Sow is a 501c3. We're a nonprofit. We're based in Berkeley, California. We're celebrating our 30th anniversary. So we've been around 30 years, since 1992. And we focus on corporate accountability. So what we do is we engage big corporations on a range of issues. Climate change is a big one, environmental health, human rights. And we talk to the companies. We literally have meetings with the biggest companies in the world. And we ask them to look at the risk that they're having, material risk on all these issues. And we do a lot of research so that we show them that by shifting their policies and practices, they can become more profitable, they can have a better brand, and it's really advantageous to them. So I always start with the whole idea of responsibility. And I start with a picture of my dog, Oscar, because if Oscar dug under the fence and knocked over the neighbor's garbage can and the neighbor knocked on my door, I would say, yeah, that's my responsibility. I'd clean up the garbage, I'd scold Oscar. But if I own a company that dumps toxic waste into a river, I feel like, well, it's really the responsibility of the board and management, and that even it's really not mine, I'm just a shareholder. But that's not true. When you're a shareholder, you are a beneficial owner of the company. The board reports to you. And even if you own one share, you have responsibility. And you can actually use that because you have the power with that one share to actually make the company to come about with some change. And it's about aligning incentives. It's about getting the executives to actually want to change in a specific way on specific key performance indicators. But we're at an inflection point right now. We are at this big change that's happening that is quite remarkable. And I'm going to go into it a little bit more, but this is the whole idea of stakeholder capitalism, that there's this fellow named Milton Friedman who put out this idea of shareholder primacy that for 50 years allowed companies to abuse their employees, have slavery in their supply chain, dump in the commons, and poison their customers. And that was all okay so long as you made as much money as possible. But now it's very different. And I'm going to get into that in a minute. So As You Sow looks at all these issues. We look at earth, air, water, people, and we believe that environmental health and human rights can be improved by shifting corporate policies. And that's because corporations are the most powerful entities on the planet. Of the 100 largest financial entities on the planet, 69 are corporations. So Walmart sits right between Canada and Spain. The scale, when they make a decision, ripples through their supply chain. And you have a lot of power to actually control that. So these are some of the companies we work with. Very few of them, but the scale. And our name is biblical: as you sow, so shall ye reap. As corporations sow, good environmental, social, and governance policies are going to reap increased share value. They're going to have an extended employee retention. So keeping your employees is the most expensive thing that a company has. Employees leave, recruiting, training, very expensive. Improve brand reputation. So brands being associated with things that people care about, and ultimately reduce risk. Every company wants to reduce risk. And shareholders have legal standing. It's a very specific set of rules. We can talk to companies about what are material things. So materiality means that it's going to affect our decisions to buy or sell their stock. So information around materiality, you can talk to the company about. And you have a lot of power, but most people don't realize it, and they abdicate their power. Most people abdicate their power not even knowing that they have it. And there is literally a revolution going on right now with people gaining their power. Last year, we had 8 majority votes, and the previous year we had 4. The previous 27 years we had 2. More people are voting their proxies. We're getting these big votes, and companies are starting to realize that the board does report to the shareholders. So the idea of stakeholder capitalism, and this just happened, the Business Roundtable at the mid 2019, and then the World Economic Forum right at the beginning of 2020, said that the ideas of Milton Friedman are no longer valid, that basically we're going to throw Uncle Milton under the bus, and that we've got these new ideas, that this new corporate purpose, which means you take care of your employees, you take care of the community, and the community could extend all the way out to, with climate change, to the whole planet. You don't poison your customers. This is a very bad thing. And we recently got Kellogg to agree to stop poisoning their customers. Almost every food company sprays what's called glyphosate or Roundup on all their wheat, oats, and beans right before they harvest it, so it gets into our food supply chain. We have a very contaminated supply chain in the United States. And we got them to agree to stop using glyphosate through their entire supply chain. So every farmer that's growing food for Kellogg is now phasing out glyphosate, phasing out pesticides. General Mills came along to do regenerative agriculture. So these are important concepts that shift the nature of the company. But stakeholder capitalism means this is what a company wants to do. This is what a successful company looks like. And what it does is it allows the emergence of a regenerative economy based on justice and sustainability. And for the extractive economy, which is what Milton Friedman's been pushing for 50 years, to actually wind down. And we're seeing this happening. We are seeing the wind down of the extractive economy and the emergence of this whole new economy. It's happening so rapidly. I see it every day. I see the companies making decisions around racial justice and around diversity, equity, inclusion, and climate change. So there's a big shift happening. And the reason is because this graph shows how much money is flowing into companies that have environmental, social, and governance principles. So 10 years ago, it was 1 out of every $12. Last year, there was a report that came out, said 1 out of every 3. There'll be a new report coming out this year. My guess is ESG, environmental, social, and governance investing, will exceed traditional investing. And that's because the companies that have a good ESG policies are the ones who are going to have less risk. And so they're going to be more profitable in the long term. And it's really important to think about that time horizon. There's always been this talk about, we got to make our quarterly numbers. Well, investors actually want to see long-term returns. And the big investors, institutional investors like pension funds and big asset managers, they really need to see long-term. So there's a shift in consciousness around this that is literally happening in real time. This is a list of the shareholder resolutions. So when we engage a company and they won't listen to us, they won't really talk to us with or appear to be wanting to make any change, we escalate that relationship by filing a shareholder resolution. It's a 500-word document. It's filed 6 months before the annual meeting. And it means that every single shareholder will get to read it, talk about it, and vote on it at the annual meeting. So you can see the number of proposals is going up. This year, we think we're actually going to hit 550. And this is not just As You Sow. As You Sow is filing, we've filed about 90 this year. This is the whole community. So not only us, but all the faith-based groups, the Catholics, the Protestants, the Unitarians, the Jews, Buddhists, they all have pension funds that file resolutions. All the social responsible investing companies, like Walden and Trillium and Green Century, we're all filing these resolutions that define really the zeitgeist. And this year, there's going to be more than ever. So shareholder advocacy, you have power in numbers. There's $100 trillion that have signed the principles of responsible investing. Now, that 100 trillion does not vote together, but if they did, well, every board of every directors reports to this group of shareholders. So if the shareholders get together and stand shoulder to shoulder, then if the companies don't have a climate transition plan, don't reduce their emissions by 5% a year over the next 10 years, if they continue to not address racial justice and diversity, equity, inclusion, then the boards will be replaced. And we saw that happening at Exxon last year. There was a group called Engine Number One. They ran a board slate of 4 people. Shareholders got together, voted in 3 of those 4 people. Now, As You Sow was running a separate campaign that was we were going to run our own board slate, but we negotiated with Exxon and we put 3 people on the board in January. Engine One knocked one of ours off. So we ended up with 5 new board members at Exxon, plus a promise from the company to add 2 more. So that's a big move. And there's a new rule that's coming into place in August called universal proxy. That's going to make it even easier to run board slates. And we will be doing that as well as other advocates. So it's another path. If a company doesn't want to talk to you, doesn't want to make change, that we can replace the board. And ultimately, that's what's going to be happening. So power in numbers. Inside, outside, there's community groups who are being affected. We recently worked with a community group in St. Louis. Kinder Morgan's a big pipeline company, and they had been spewing toxic emissions into this community for years, wouldn't talk to the community. So we filed a resolution about this, and now Kinder Morgan is in dialogue with the community. We're going to make sure that we can get these emissions reduced. And so we could play a role by delivering a message as a shareholder that a frontline group won't have access to. Leaders and laggards. I'm going to show you in a minute some report cards that we do pretty constantly. We put out one today called the Clean 200, but we're always evaluating companies on a range of issues and then saying, okay, this company scored a 5, this company scored a 52, and we go and talk to the company that scored a 5 and say, your direct competitor is doing better than you on these exact metrics. And this is the cost of becoming competitive. And here's the risk of not doing anything. And it always works that it's going to cost them much less to actually solve the problem, because by not doing anything, they're going to tarnish their brand, they're going to lose competitive advantage, and they're also going to be subject to litigation. And watchdog just means that when we sign one of these agreements with a company, it's generally over 3 to 5 years. So we check back with them very regularly and make sure they're hitting their numbers. When we filed a resolution with Monster Beverage on slavery and supply chain, they had scored a 0 on a scorecard called Know the Chain. It wasn't one of ours, it was an ally of ours. We got them, we filed a resolution. They completely rebuilt their entire system of their whole purchasing system. And we check back with them now every year. And I can tell you that in 2021, they hit their 2022 numbers. They've retrained their entire staff. They've rewritten all their contracts. And so they went from 0 to really taking care of the issue because they saw that it was going to be risky. So last year we had 188 engagements. It means we met with 188 companies on a range of issues from climate change. I'll take you through all those in a minute. So of those, 102 companies said, thank you, this is great stuff. You guys are McKinsey for free, let's go do it. 86 said, nah, we're not going to think about this. So we filed resolutions with those companies. Now, we don't own any shares, As You Sow does not. So we get other people who own shares. And if you own equities, let's say we want to file with Yum Brands on ocean plastics, you might own shares of Yum and you could authorize us to file on your behalf. So every one of those resolutions that we filed was filed on behalf of an individual that owns shares or an institutional. Sometimes it's like, different groups. So once we filed the resolution, that escalated it. And so about half the company said, okay, we'll do something. And we signed a withdrawal agreement, an agreement for them to make the changes over a certain amount of time and to publicly put it out there on their website, in the press, so they'd be held accountable. So about half of them were withdrawn. The other half went to a vote. it says 5 majority votes. We actually had 8. This slide was made a little while ago. 43% average vote, and about 1.7 trillion was voted yes on as you sow resolutions. So we're a small group. We're 30 people in Berkeley that are getting a seat at the table because using this technique, using the power of shareholders. So I'm going to take you through just some of our areas. So climate change, we're working with every public company in the United States to have a 5% emission reduction over the next decade. It's a global effort. There's a team in Australia, one in Asia, Europe, and Canada. The idea is every public company needs to have a 5% emission reduction in order for the countries to make their Paris numbers. This is all proceeding now, and we're negotiating with about 180 companies right now, and we filed about 40 resolutions. Ocean plastics. We recently got Unilever to agree to stop using 100,000 tons of plastic. We're trying to get absolute numbers from companies. Yum Brands, Dunkin' Donuts, and McDonald's all agreed to stop using styrofoam. So about 3 billion styrofoam cups won't be produced this year because of these resolutions. So we got a big, Coca-Cola made a big agreement just this week where they're going to be actually refilling bottles as well as recycling bottles. So each company, we're getting the reduction in plastics. It's a huge, huge problem. Environmental health, I mentioned about halting pesticides. That's glyphosate and herbicides. And regenerative farming is transforming the way that farming takes place. We recently put out a report on this, and we had the head of farming from General Mills on our webinar, and he showed us a farm that was industrial farming and one that was regenerative farming after a climate-induced massive weather system, like huge storm. Industrial ag, completely no soil, wiped out. Regenerative ag, there were some puddles, but that was a farm that could keep working. And what he said was, the reason General Mills supports this is because we need a resilient supply chain so that we can keep selling the products that we sell. So there is a business reason why the companies do it. Again, we never ask them to do the right thing, but we show them the evidence that a resilient supply chain is going to keep them in business. Social justice. After the George Floyd murder, we looked around and we said, there's no way to measure all these companies in terms of racial justice. So we convened a group and we developed 26 key performance indicators of racial justice. We then went out and gathered the data on 1,000 companies on the Russell 1000. We now publish that scorecard, as well as 31 key performance indicators on diversity, equity, inclusion. And we maintain that data. We update it once a quarter. And transparency. We work really hard to get companies to disclose honestly. And what's really important is we want them to disclose. So we filed a resolution at Exxon and Chevron last year, got a 49 to 48% vote, asking them to disclose their scope 3 emissions. That's the emissions from the products that they make, and have it verified and audited. So right now, that's a big issue because not many companies even disclose scope 3, and if they do, it's very inaccurate. So I'm going to switch over to, this is our website, and I'm going to scroll down here and show you, this is a whole set of tools called Invest Your Value. Now, what this is about, this is actually the opposite. This is divestment. This is knowing what's in your mutual funds. So you can go to this site and you could type in, for instance, might as well spell it right, Vanguard, and what'll pop up is all these Vanguard funds, and you can click on one. Now, most people know that a mutual fund is a basket of stocks, but you never know what's inside it. The prospectus only shows you the top 10 holdings, but we show you everything. So for instance, this particular fund owns all of these big oil companies. These are companies with reserves. These are all the coal companies that it owns. These are all the fossil-fired utilities. We also do a carbon footprint. We aggregate up all of the emissions from every company. And so we give you those numbers. But you can see there's 209 fossil fuel companies. Since we're doing this, we look at the same basket of stocks through the lens of deforestation. So now you're going to see companies that are in the business of palm oil, paper pulp, rubber, timber, cattle, soy, so Archer Daniels Midland, all the banks who fund all of this. So JP Morgan's they're always the number one, and Bank of America. And all the consumer brands. So For instance, Pepsi Cola, they use palm oil in their potato chips. So we look at a whole lot of stuff in here, and we look at the details on every company within every fund. And we also look at some racial justice issues, prison industrial complex. Do you own companies that are profiting from mass incarceration? In this case, you do. And you can go and look at every single one of them, see what percentage, see what they do. So you own Core Civic, which is the world's largest private prison company. And this tool also gives you the ability to search funds. So you could go here and you could say, sort them by financial performance, like 3-year financial performance. And I only want to see diversified funds, and make sure that the fossil fuel grade is at least a B. And now it just resorted itself. It's very fast. And you can go through all these different funds, and you could say, oh, I want to see this one. I want to see this one. And, show me this one. And you can do comparisons. So these are tools to enable you to look at the fund, look at the grades, and also look at the returns. And the fees are all built into this. So because we have all this data and we update it monthly, we then start to look at what's in the 401k plans of major companies. And we will be doing the whole S&P 500 as well as all the big universities. So Amazon, they do a great job operationally on climate. They have 100,000 electric vehicles, but every person who works at Amazon owns companies burning down the Amazon. And so we talked to them about it. We've been doing a whole campaign talking to their employees. They didn't want to change, so we filed a shareholder resolution, and now we are in conversations with Amazon. One last thing I do want to show you before I stop is under reports. I was talking about these scorecards. So if you want to look at plastic pollution, this is a scorecard that we do. We usually update them once every other month, but we started displaying the data as a visualization. And so you can go in here and you could say, oh, let me go look, let me compare a couple of companies. So it'll come up in just a second. Should come up in just a second. So what this is 50 companies. So the companies who are in the business of consumer packaging, fast food, and also bottling and beverage. Now, why isn't it working? Well, maybe it'll work later and I can show you. But on our report card, on our reports page, there are all kinds of different reports. So this one's on pesticides, and each one will show you a whole range of different issues about each of these companies, rated, and then being able to compare company to company. So
Thank you so much. I'm inspired, and I promise that from now on I will vote my proxies. I have not done that before. If any of you want to commit to that too, or commit to some other action, please put it in the chat. I have a particular soft spot for As You Sow because I was for many years a Vanguard index fund investor. And then when I realized that not all fund names were truly accurate labeling and that there were issues, I did a lot of research. I used As You Sow and changed up my investments, which was just a tremendous resource. And really their site works like all the time since I've ever been there. So just saying that was truly a one-off glitch. But stock funds are only part of the investing universe. At a certain point, I decided I would tap into a financial advisor to help me understand the more complete picture of my portfolio and what it should look like. And today we are happy to have here a financial advisor who can talk about how you can green your portfolio. Patrick Costello is a fellow graduate of EFM's Masterclass, a certified financial planner, and the founder of Green River Sustainable Financial Services. Not only has he generously agreed to participate in the webinar, he's also offering attendees a free 10-minute consultation about their own situation. So thank you for that, Patrick. Details will follow in our email tomorrow. So let's get started. So I understand that, with any financial planner, a big part of the job is to understand the client's circumstances, their goals and experience, as well as their assets. And you really need all that in order to recommend how they divide their money among different asset classes. So you're not going to be handing out a little tip sheet right now. But let's skip ahead. Once you've got that complete picture of the client, and once you've agreed on their mix of asset classes, how do you go about greening their whole portfolio?
Well, first, let me thank the Environmental Forum for inviting me to be part of this presentation. It's a great pleasure, and it was wonderful to take the course as well, so I'm proud to be a graduate. So your question is great. It is a pretty thorough and lengthy and detailed process to work with a client, a new client, and really get clarity about how much risk they are comfortable with and how much is suitable given their objective circumstances, their age, how long until they may need to withdraw money from a particular account. But we're not going to dwell too much on that because you could fill up 20 minutes just talking about that part of the process. It's a mixture of science and art, different kinds of communication, questionnaires, back and forth. Um, so once we feel pretty clear about how the portfolio should look, we really end up with something we call a template. It looks like a pie chart. And within that pie chart, we use what the industry calls style box analysis, which is imperfect. I think it was originated by Morningstar, which is one of my primary data partners, along with As You Sow, who are also fantastic partners. And so this is when we work on the concept of diversification. You know, that word can't be used enough. It does get bandied about quite a bit, and it means different things to different people. But just to kind of paint a broad picture, if you truly want to be diversified and you want to be protected, you know, one of the permanent factors about the financial markets is that they are unpredictable. And one year, you know, large US stocks, companies will lead the entire world in terms of performance. The next year, they could be near the bottom of the list. And instead, emerging markets, which is a category that includes Brazil, Indonesia, China, India, etc. So, you know, we try to divide up the entire world's economy into different categories. Japan and Europe are usually put in one box in a way. Then there's emerging markets, which is another box. Then there's domestic. So in a way, we can sort of, just as a way of organizing our thoughts, divide it into three categories. And now within that category, there's very small companies. A very small company has a totally different look on every level from a very large company that's already penetrated markets all over the world and probably won't, you know, grow by 15 or 20% next year. So we try to help, we build this portfolio, it's like a pie chart, and we literally plan out what percentage of the whole is going to go into each one of these categories. And we use software to help us do that. And then the software will actually give us a printout that, based on the historical performance of these companies, and of course the future is always different than the past, but you know, we use this as a way to give us some guideposts going into the future. We can then, I can come back to a client and say, look, this is kind of where we see you in terms of how much risk you can take on. This is your time horizon. This is the portfolio that we've constructed for you. And these are the funds that we have sort of created a universe of that have very high ESG scores, have low carbon footprints compared to their peers, and also excellent long-term performance. We have our universe of funds that we've collected over time. And then we populate this pie chart in these different categories with these particular funds that we've found to be outstanding in their particular realms.
So like if I came to you with like, or we arrived at my ideal mix of this percentage of, you know, cash equivalents / bond funds / equities, then you'd be like, okay, here are your best choices in that, within those equity categories, like small cap, large cap, whatever. Here are your best choices within these bond funds. And so you said that you'd work with As You Sow to come up with a lot of your equity rankings. So what do you do to do the research in bond funds? Is that where Morningstar comes in?
Yes, we ought to ask Andrew when he intends to get a corporate bond search engine going with As You Sow. Because
You know, this is something that we have wanted to do since the very beginning. The problem is that there is no database that links the code numbers in the Morningstar. So we get a feed from Morningstar with all the holdings of every mutual fund every month. And the bonds have a number. We can't even tell munis versus corporate bonds, and we cannot tell which corporate bonds link to which corporations. And then even if we could get there, we wouldn't know what the use of funds are. No such database exists that we know of. We've tried to get a grant to build such a database, but nobody is really that interested. And I talked to the folks like at Breckenridge, the biggest bond trader, and they say nobody cares. Like, all anybody wants to know in a bond is, are you going to pay it back, and what's the, you know, at what percentage? So we're not sure. We'd love to do bonds, but we just don't have the secret Batman decoder ring. And you know, we're there. We're ready to do it.
I hear you. Well, I haven't plumbed the depths of exactly how Morningstar derives its sustainability scores for its bond funds, but that's what we use.
Mhm.
And there's other kinds of bonds that aren't issued by corporations. There's municipal bonds that have certain preferential tax attributes if they're issued by municipalities in your state.
Mhm.
There's federal bonds. There's combinations of multi-state bond funds. So the bond sector of the financial services industry is nowhere near as transparent as the stock side of things. But bonds are extremely important. They stabilize a portfolio. But then a little sidebar too is there's certain kind of bonds that actually are extremely volatile. There's one category that used to be called in the old days junk bonds, and so they rebranded as high yield. So basically, they'll pay you a heck of a high interest rate because you're taking on a lot of risk that they won't be able to maybe continue the payments that they signed up to pay you, and they may not be able to return all of your principal. So, you get what you pay for in a sense. But even the bond marketplace can be dangerous if you don't know what you're looking for.
Well, so if someone comes to you and you've like worked together to come up with like you've helped them, point them in the direction, or you've gone through it them yourself about how to change certain investments to greener equivalents. What's a transition process like? I'm guessing you don't just like do one day scrape and replace, but I don't know what's what's it like.
Well, there's probably three things I should touch on. One, obviously, if someone has, for example, just sold a big piece of property and this money is in a bank account, and we start with cash. I mean, that's the easiest scenario. But even in that circumstance, it's very rare unless the client is just insistent on, look, we have a super long time horizon. We don't care when you get into the market, just go for it. I will, use my experience doing this for 27, 28 years, almost as long as you sow has been around, to kind of, I call it tiptoeing into the market. You look for a day when stocks are down, when stock indexes are down. I always rub my hands together and go, great, what a buying opportunity. It's like running down to Woolworths when socks are on sale. Go get them when they're cheaper. The emotional impact with human beings, though, a lot of times when it comes to investing is the other way. We know from lots and lots of studies, I'm sure Andrew has talked about the Dalbar studies that show that inevitably human beings left to their own devices will buy more when stocks get more expensive, and they'll sell when stocks get cheap. So we try to help people not do that. And that's one of the important parts of building a portfolio that actually does reflect the client's true risk tolerance. And that's a tricky thing because people tend to estimate their risk. Oh, yeah, I can take a little volatility. That's no big deal. Yeah, okay, let's see what happens in March of 2020 when the indexes changed by 10% in one day. And I can't tell you how many people have come up to me that had never had a financial advisor before and said, wow, after 2008, I lost half of my money and then I got out of the market and never got back in. So I need some help. So that's one of the things that a good financial advisor can kind of help you cool your jets a little bit if you're about to respond too aggressively to that reptile brain.
Yeah, I remember seeing an intake form from some financial services place, and it asked me specifically what I'd done during certain periods of time in the past, because it's a better predictor than what I would say I do.
Ah, right.
Yeah, what did you actually do during that time period? I'm looking at the time, and we don't have a ton of it. So but I did want to ask this question that I think a lot of people hope to get from a financial planner or someone on the inside, which is, hey, I heard about this cool new technology where they're using, kelp to generate power, and I'd really like to get in on the ground floor, and it's not a public company yet, and how can I like get involved, right? Which is
Right.
totally legitimate, right? But it does kind of speak to it's hard. I think that's when a person really needs guidance on this hot new investment opportunity that's not yet a public thing.
Well, I almost blanch when I hear the hot investment. Even just that terminology kind of freaks me out a little bit.
Think of it as exciting.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, first of all, if just remember that when you've noticed an investment opportunity, there's 100,000 other people that have already seen it and have already been thinking about it. One of the ways I try to shift people's whole way of thinking is to use a simple metaphor. And I'm sorry, but the genders tend to respond a little differently to this. Men really seem to have the hunter mentality when they're investing, especially on their own. I say, no, that's not the right way to go. Think of investing as more of a farming enterprise. You plant your seeds, you nourish, the crop, and you take your time and you wait for the harvest. And, when it's time, hopefully you'll have a decent harvest and you kind of overlook the ups and downs. Um, Turning on the television set in the morning, these financial shows that have the lights blinking and all the colors and all the so-called experts that are opining about what's hot and what's not, it'll drive you crazy. It'll take your eye off your real goal in the most part. And if a person, but then let me segue back to the essence of your question. I always say to people that are fired up about, sharpshooting an individual company that for some reason, they're the only ones that know how great this company is going to be in a couple of years. Go to their website and see what the criteria and threshold is. One of my client's sons just persuaded his dad to let him invest in SpaceX, which is not public yet. And their minimum investment was $200,000. You had to sign an agreement that you would pay them 2% a year on whatever the amount of money was that you're investing. And most financial planners charge about 1%, give or take, plus 25% of any profits that are made. So, wow, that's like a major hedge fund way of charging the client. But yeah, you have to go directly to that company website, work directly with them, and I don't do that for my clients because it's too hard, really, to assess what the risk is on one company. That's putting all your eggs in one basket.
Yeah, what I've come across is some like limited partnership or promissory notes, that kind of thing for startup organizations that are, not big public companies. In my case, I was looking at regenerative agriculture notes. But even then, like you were saying, it maybe doesn't have like the immediate sizzle, but it takes a lot of sophistication to truly gauge the risk to your capital. And that's the thing, your capital is at risk with those types of investments.
Right. And here's just another idea that I've used before. There are certain funds that I have a close relationship to the management team. One of them is Green Alpha, Shelton Green Alpha. They manage money for the Sierra Club, and they have really one main mutual fund that's volatile. It went up over 100% in 2021, lost 10 or 15% last year. But it doesn't hurt to literally send an email to the leadership team and mention this hot new stock that you just found out about, and they'll give you their own take on it.
Oh,
You might find a beautiful company that's, if it's pre-IPO, that's kind of another challenge. There are some funds that I've seen that aggregate a bunch of these pre-IPO companies, and but again, those things are pretty risky. But there's nothing wrong with querying the management team or the leadership team of a fund family that does things the way you like to see them done. That's definitely an option.
was that the Sierra Club you mentioned? Something about the Sierra
Yeah,
Club?
there's a fund management company called Shelton Green Alpha,
Hmm.
and they have, one of the funds, and the leader, Garvin, he's got a very complicated last name, and I better not even try it. But Garvin has been here in San Anselmo and spoken at the San Anselmo Presbyterian Church about what their fund does. And he's very long-term thinking, and he sort of defies this. In the old days, everybody wanted to make sure that their fund fit right into one of those little style boxes. It's medium-sized, and it's a blend between growth and value. Garvin said, no, we're not going that way. We're going to own some companies that are foreign. We're going to own some big ones, some small ones. So that's just an example. That's what I do in my business. I try to really get to know some of these fund families that are committed to sustainability enterprise-wide, and that also, to Andrew's point, vote the proxies for their clients through their funds.
Right. So we're running low on time. I just have one more quick question, which is I think you used the phrase accredited investor, but I've certainly seen the phrase accredited investor. Can you is that like a universally standard term, or is it defined by different companies? And can you tell us a bit about what it means?
Well, I believe it's defined by the SEC. It's a very, it's a nationwide rule that if something is not a publicly traded stock or bond, then they're trying to come up with some criteria that conveys some assurance that the investor has enough sophistication to make some decisions about risk, and also, more importantly, can withstand the risk of their money if
Right.
it's a very predictable investment. So, and obviously as time goes on, these standards change, but the typical threshold now is, you need to show, a single person needs to show about $200,000 of income for a couple of years in a row, or have a net worth, and that means, all assets minus all liabilities. And a lot of people that live on the coast actually do look like they have $1 million net worth because real estate is so expensive and has been appreciating like crazy. But that's the general threshold for an accredited investor to go and invest in pre-IPO limited partnerships: $200,000 a year of income or 1 million of net worth.
Wow. Okay, well, thank you for that. And I hope we'll have time to circle back during the Q&A, because I'll bet a lot of people have questions for you. And I just want to remind people, I said this kind of quickly at the start, but Patrick has offered to provide like a free 10-minute consultation with people who have questions after the event, or we'll put in the follow-up email some details about how you can tap into that. But he's happy to
Absolutely.
help the
Feel
people.
free to email or call.
Well, thank you so much for that, Patrick. That was really very helpful. I feel like we could have talked for a long time.
Just getting started. Okay.
So, hey, if anyone's feeling inspired to revisit their investment choices or their investment balance, feel free to comment about that in the chat. I wanted to talk about the next step on my personal journey, which is to think about charitable giving. So I already donate to a lot of the causes that I care about, but I can never give as much as I want, because you know what? I have to think about my own financial well-being too. I have kids as well. And once I'm gone, I want whatever money that's left over, not just to provide for my children, but also to help protect and regenerate the earth, because ultimately the two are tied. I mean, how can I hope for a good future for my children if the environment is a mess? It's not going to happen. So it turns out that there are a lot of different ways of leaving money to nonprofits. Some are more tax efficient than others, and some are so easy that you don't even need an estate plan or a will, which it turns out is important because almost half of all adults in the US don't have a will in place. Our next speaker, Bonnie Landless-Dowling, is a lawyer with Keegan Harrison in San Rafael. Her practice focuses on estate and tax planning and trust and estate administration. She advises her estate and tax planning clients on a wide range of issues, from the most basic to complex and high net worth estate and tax planning. But before she gives her presentation, she'd like to get a sense of where you're at with this issue. So here are some questions we'd like to ask. I heard that there was a problem with the previous poll. So sorry about that. This one won't have that issue. We figured out what it is. But if you guys could go ahead and answer these questions, remember your answers are anonymous. So it goes like this. Please check all that apply. Do you have a will, an estate plan, a life insurance policy, or retirement funds such as an IRA or a pension? Wow, 76% of you have a will, defying the odds. Actually, it might be that people who know they'll look good on these polls actually are the ones who complete them. I'm just putting that out there as a theory. 61% have an estate plan, 36% have a life insurance policy, and 91% have retirement funds such as an IRA or a pension. So, Bonnie, where does that leave us? What do you make of that?
I think that sounds probably about right. You'd be surprised how many people come in and meet with me after, getting through their career, getting close to the end of their career, and they've got some kids, and they realize that they never sat down and did their estate plan. So I think that 61% for a full estate plan, 76% for a will. I think that's probably just about right. Kim was going to put up a presentation for me. So while she's doing that, I will introduce myself. As Anne-Christine said, my name is Bonnie Landless-Dowling. I am an attorney with Keegan Harrison. We are a small firm, been around in Marin County for 50 or 60 years. We were the Bianchi law firm many years ago, and we are now Keegan Harrison. We're in downtown San Rafael. We offer a variety of services, but what I focus on is entirely regarding estates. So I help clients with establishing an estate plan, whatever that means for the client. It all depends on the client's assets and their family situation. Or when somebody passes away, clients will come to see me, and that will either be because we have to probate the estate, which is not ideal, but it happens, or because we need to administer the estate under a trust or a will that it doesn't require the probate process. So I just wanted to briefly talk today about different things that our clients can do to realize their charitable intent. And it's important, obviously, if you're a charitable person and you want to incorporate that into your giving plan, that you write it down, that you express that intent one way or the other. So there are a couple ways to do that. So I'm going to go through a couple of examples, but just to give an overview of what I'm going to talk about today. We have the basic estate plan. Basic estate plan generally includes a will or a revocable living trust, or both. Basic estate plans are great because they're simple and direct. You can either give a specific dollar amount to charity or charities, or you can actually give a percentage of your total assets that are in your trust to the charity or charities of your choice. You can also, through an estate plan, articulate a specific purpose for your gift. So if you wanted your money to go to a certain a campaign that a charity was engaging in, then you can actually specifically state that in your documents, or you can actually just leave the gift for general charitable purposes, which would just go into the charity's general fund. The other way that you can leave money to your charities of choice relatively simply is through your retirement accounts or life insurance. You can designate a charity as the beneficiary on these accounts for all or a portion of those accounts. You can also, there are some lifetime planning techniques that we're going to discuss that will give you the opportunity not only to support the charities of your choice, but also give you some tax benefits that can be helpful. There are some more complex estate planning techniques that we generally use for high net worth clients. Right now, high net worth means roughly $25 million or more for a married couple. That will change. What high net worth means. 25 million is roughly the amount that a married couple could give without incurring an estate tax this year. That will probably change. It will probably go down significantly, but that's where we are right now. And then I want to just talk briefly, if you already have an estate plan, which we saw a majority of you out there already do, the simple ways that we can adjust those estate plans to maybe bring in a gift to a charity or charities. So next slide, please. So the first couple that we're going to talk about here are Tom and Alice. Tom and Alice are 80 and 78. They have 2 children, Janet and Mary Alice, and 5 grandchildren. And their assets are, they have real estate worth about 1.5 million. Tom has an IRA worth 750,000. Alice has one worth 500,000. There's a life insurance policy on Tom's life for $100,000, and they have cash in the bank of about $75,000. So what can Tom and Alice do if they want to leave some of their estate to charity? So next slide, please. So this is what a basic estate plan looks like with a specific gift to charity. So you'll see at the top there, we are only listing as the assets that we're considering in this example, the assets that are in the trust itself, which in this case are the real estate, the life insurance, and the cash. Generally, you don't see IRA accounts in the trust. You might, but most of the time we do not include IRA or other retirement type accounts, 401k, 403b. Those are generally not included in the trust assets. So we're only going to talk about those assets in this example. What Tom and Alice want to do is they want to leave some specific gifts to charity, and they particularly like the Environmental Forum of Marin and As You Sow. So they're going to leave $100,000 to the Environmental Forum of Marin and $75,000 to As You Sow. Those specific gifts are going to come right off the top of the assets in the trust. Then they're going to leave the rest of their assets, which is the value of those assets, about $1.5 million. We're going to split those two between Janet and Mary Alice. So that's a simple way to make a specific gift to the 2 charities. Again, by doing it this way, you can actually specifically state what you want the charity to do with the money, or you can just leave it up to the charity and leave it for their general charitable purposes. All right, next slide, please. This is an example of a specific, or pardon me, of the residual gift to a charity. So we've got the same trust assets there, real estate, life insurance, and cash. In this case, let's say Janet and Mary Alice are either they're doing just fine, or maybe did something that irritated Tom and Alice, who knows? But they've decided Tom and Alice, or maybe Tom and Alice are really charitably motivated. They want to leave the specific gifts instead to Janet and Mary Alice, and the remaining assets to Environmental Forum of Marin and As You Sow. I should note another reason that maybe Tom and Alice did it this way is that those IRAs, those individual retirement accounts that you don't see listed here, maybe they named Janet and Mary Alice as the beneficiary on those accounts instead, and are leaving these other assets to the charities, the majority of the assets to the charities. Again, it can be for a specific purpose for the charity to use the money, or it can be for their general charitable purposes. All right, next slide, please. All right, now we're gonna kind of mix all of this together. So we're addressing the life insurance, the IRAs, and the revocable living trust assets all at once. And we're gonna do a mix of distributions here. So in this instance, Tom and Alice want to include their grandchildren. So out of the trust, we're gonna go $15,000 to each grandchild. That adds up to, I believe, $75,000. And then we're going to leave 50% of the residual of the trust to Janet and Mary Alice. Then, instead of having the life insurance as a part of the trust, we're actually going to designate the beneficiary of the life insurance to be the Rainforest Action Network. So the Rainforest Action Network will be designated on that life insurance policy. On Tom's death, all that the Rainforest Action Network has to do is file a claim with the life insurance policy, and they'll receive a check for that death benefit. And then Tom and Alice decided that they're going to leave the Environmental Forum of Marin, Tom's IRA, and Alice's IRA is going to be left to As You Sow. With this type of beneficiary designation, you're generally not able to direct specifically what the charity should do with the funds. But it's a very simple way of leaving money to charity without actually needing a trust or a will or anything. You just contact whoever manages that retirement account or that life insurance policy. They'll provide you with a form that you fill out, and that's it. Right there, you've made your charitable gift right on the policy itself. Next slide, please. I'm going to give you one more example of a little bit more complex situation. So we got Mary and Chris here. Mary is 67 and Chris is 73. They have two children, Austin and Charlie, who are young adults. Mary and Chris are still working. Mary makes about $300,000 a year, and Chris makes $350,000 a year. So they've got some good taxable income that they need to think about. Their assets that they've accumulated over the years, they've got their real estate is valued at $2.5 million. Mary's IRA is $2 million. Chris's IRA is 2.25. We've got life insurance on each of them. Mary's is $1 million. Chris is a little bit lower because she's a bit older. Hers is $750,000. They own 1,000 shares of Facebook that they purchased in the initial IPO. $38 a share, and they want to get rid of that. They want to get rid of that stock. So we're going to talk about some ways to do that. And then they've got a brokerage account with other securities in it valued about $3 million and cash and $350,000. So let's look at some options for some charitable and tax planning that we can do for Mary and Chris. So next slide, please. So one thing that you can do, and I think that this is a really great way to, if you're looking at re-evaluating your portfolio and maybe getting rid of some of those stocks that don't meet your values with respect to environmental issues or social justice issues, you want to get rid of that stock. There are some different ways to do that. So in this case, we're just going to use Facebook as an example. So Mary and Chris purchased some Facebook stock back at the initial IPO. They got it for $38 a share. The current value of Meta, it's now called, is $221. So the appreciation that Mary and Chris are holding in that stock is about $183,000. If Mary and Chris wanted to get rid of that stock, and their plan was to donate some of the proceeds, some or all of the proceeds of liquidating that stock, And we're going to assume a 15% capital gains rate, probably higher than that, but we're just going to make that assumption. If they sold the stock to donate the cash, they would be paid $27,450 in long-term capital gains taxes because of that $183,000 appreciation. That means if they turned around and gifted the cash to the charity, they've now gone from a $221,000 stock to $193,550 in cash. The amount to the charity is gone down, as well as the tax deduction available to Mary and Chris. What if instead of selling the stock, they gave the appreciated stock directly to the charity? The charity being a 501c3 or 501c4 or whatever it might be, generally is going to have a much easier time, lower tax burden of selling appreciated stock. Charity gets $221,000 in value, and Mary and Chris get a tax deduction for the full amount. So if you're trying to maybe offload some securities in your portfolio that are not meeting your goals or your values, this is a great way to do that, as well as make a gift to the charity or charities of your choice at the same time. Next slide, please. The other way that Mary and Chris can think about making some donations to charity that have a current taxable benefit to them, tax reduction benefit to them, is through what's called a qualified charitable distribution. So this is through your IRA. Individuals over 70 and a half can each year donate up to $100,000 out of their IRA. This counts as their required minimum distribution for that year, which reduces their income. So in this case, Chris is currently 72. She'll be 73 by the end of the year. She's going to have to take from that $2.25 million IRA about $85,000, which is taxable income. As we saw, Chris and Mary have plenty of taxable income. They don't want this, and they want to instead make this qualified charitable distribution. So what they're able to do is transfer up to $100,000 to the charity of their choice. It will satisfy the RMD this year, which means they will not increase their income by that $85,000, and the money will go straight to the charity. It's another great tax efficient way to make donations to charity if you've got an IRA. All right, next slide, please. Then we have some options for complex estate planning. I'll briefly touch on this just because they are more complex, but one tool that we often see is what's called a charitable remainder trust. Charitable remainder trust is an irrevocable trust that is set up so that the person who set up the trust or some other person, maybe your children, get to receive income from the trust, whatever assets you've put into the trust, for a defined term, which can be a life term or a term of 20 years or less, with whatever's left over after that term going to the named beneficiary or beneficiaries. Two ways to do that. It either can be based on a fixed percentage amount distributed each year, or it can be based on the income generated by the assets. Just all depends on the type of assets that you're going to be putting in the trust. And then whatever's left over is, like I said, goes to the charity or charity of your choices. And you can, in this case, specifically state what the charities can use the funds for. This is not only beneficial, obviously, to the charities, but the person setting this up can generally take some sort of income or estate tax reduction, depending on the circumstances and the way that it's structured. So another great way to leave assets to charity while also getting some personal tax benefits. Next slide, please. All right, so you already have a plan. Like I said, most of you already do. What do we need to do to update it, to bring in some of these values that we've talked about? So if you have a trust, generally we can simply prepare what's called a trust amendment. Trust amendments are often only a couple of pages long, and they can alter your current trust to provide for either a specific gift to charity or a residual gift to charity, whichever you decide is the best way to go forward. A will codicil is essentially just an amendment to a will. So same idea. but if you don't have a trust and you only have a will. For changing the way that your retirement accounts are designated or your life insurance, you simply request what's called a beneficiary designation form. Generally, let's say you have your investments with Fidelity, they can email you that form. You can write right on the form who you want to receive it. So you can go 25% to the environmental forum of Marin, 25% to As You Sow, and then 25% to each of your 2 children. Once you've done that, you sign it. You generally can just email it or fax it straight or send it straight back to the company, and they will update the beneficiary designation so that on your death, the assets are distributed according to what you've designated. And just a gentle reminder here, gentle in all caps and in bold, but if you want your values, if you want your money to support your values, remember you have to write it down. If anything were to happen to you and you don't have it properly documented, then of course we're not able to realize those values.
Wow, that was great. Thank you so much. And when you're talking about you have to write it down, you also talked a bit about the beneficiary designation. I have a friend who's had someone in his family pass away unexpectedly, and she hadn't written anything down because her situation was kind of volatile. Some of her main relationships were kind of volatile, and he said, but with a beneficiary designation form, you can not only can you fill it out and fax it to them, you can change it like once a day for every day.
That's right.
So don't let anything delay you. Like, well, I'm not really sure how that's going to pan out. No, just write it for now and know that you can always revisit that. And it's a simple thing. It doesn't require any kind of, legal intervention.
Right. And I always do tell my clients, I said, we're planning for worst case scenario.
Yeah.
So you have to make sure that your documents, your beneficiary designations are in line with what your values, your wishes are today. And if they change tomorrow, then we'll change them tomorrow. But we have to plan for the worst case scenario. So perfect example of why we need to do that.
Exactly. Well, we're now moving on to the Q&A portion of the webinar. Remember, we're going to focus on taking questions from the Q&A section of Zoom, not the chat. And while I check and see what questions have come in, feel free to put in the chat any commitments you feel inspired to make as a result of what we've learned today. But for speakers, let's see. What's interesting is one of these questions actually overlaps with the question I have. So Kelly Santos asks if Andrew has any suggestions for how to become aware of what shareholder proposals are up for votes in funds we might be invested in. What's the best way to track the information? And maybe the answer to that is on As You Sow's site. And my question that I scribbled down was related to that. It's like, does anyone actually, an organization like As You Sow, do you reach out to the shareholders to advise them about, an attempt to like gather forces together to make a conclusive vote at a shareholder meeting?
So I'm putting in the chat a proxypreview.org. We publish this every year. It's coming out on March 17th, and it aggregates up all the shareholder resolutions that are happening, not just As You Sows, but everybody, the whole field. There'll be about 550 of them this year. And so you'll get to read what all of them are, exactly which companies are going to, and also we always do a sidebar by the proponents. So why political spending is really important, or why this particular resolution to insurance companies is really important. And so it gives it context of what we're trying to get the companies to do. But a really important point in the question is, if you own mutual funds, you actually do not have the right to vote your shares right now. But this is something we're working on, that right now, if you own a Vanguard target date fund in your 401k, Vanguard is voting for you. You have, by virtue of buying into this mutual fund, given them your rights, and they are going to be voting against every one of our resolutions. They're going to be voting for every egregious CEO pay package. They're going to be voting against every climate resolution. BlackRock has said that they're going to start to allow institutional investors to split away from the way BlackRock votes. And so we're actually right now starting a whole campaign to get each company like Amazon to say, we want to vote our way, not Vanguard's way, because Vanguard is just literally 100% for management. So this is a power struggle that's happening literally today. I just saw the folks who actually process all the votes. It's a place called Broadridge. I've seen what they've built. They have the back end. There is going to be a huge shift in power happening over the next few years, where people who own shares of mutual funds will be able to get what's called fractional voting or split voting. Right now, only Fidelity offers it, but soon everyone will be getting it. And also, if you're just a retail shareholder, Broadridge just put out an app, so you can get it on your phone. And if you put in your email address, it'll aggregate all your control numbers of all of the equities you own across all your custodians. That probably, I just said a lot of big words in there, but if you own shares at Schwab and at E-Trade, all you do is put in your email and it'll pull them all together, and then you'll be able to vote. Now, right now you can only click on against management or for management.
Right.
Now, As You Sow has built a voting tool called As You Vote. It sits on the Broadridge platform. So if you're an institution, if you're an endowment or a foundation, you could become a Broadridge client and just say, as you vote, vote everything for me. And it's one click. We will vote every company, every issue across the board. So it's a big shift that's happening right now.
Wow, that's incredible. And it sounded like you were saying that as an individual investor, I could get this app or I could become part of this, and then
You could download the app, but it'll only allow you to either vote against management, for management, or you can open up and you'll see voting for each different director, for the auditor, for the CEO pay, and then each resolution. So there might be 20 choices to make on every ballot.
oh,
And so As You Vote automates that. We have a set of guidelines that is a rules-based engine that fills out all of these, every ballot for every company. But again, right now it's only institutional. Soon we will be on that app. We're working with Broadridge to get so that you can just click As You Vote and boom, you'd be done. And we would be voting in the most ESG aligned way. So we'd be voting for 50% women on the boards. We'd be voting for probably against more than half of the CEO pay packages. Again, Vanguard votes for 98% of them.
okay. Well, I'm gonna circle up with you afterwards so I get that in my follow-up email, because I'll bet a lot of people want to know more about that.
But March 17th, proxy preview, it'll be a webinar, and we'll be posting this report that we do every year. It'll be the 18th year of doing
Okay,
it.
well, I'll be happy to publicize that as well, because I think a lot of people would like to know. So one of the questions that's come in is, and I think I know the answer, but it's how can you look at individual, let's see, it's about the mutual fund investments. What was the website you were using for the mutual funds investments? That was As You Sow, right?
Yeah, it's
Correct.
it's called Invest Your Values, and I'll put the chat. I'll put it in the chat.
Okay. And then someone else actually makes a great point that, As You Sow gets a view on many of these different funds, but she's curious about how she can get the grades of specific corporations and companies before she invests in their stocks. What would you advise is the best way of doing that?
So that's what I was trying to show. It actually, as soon as I stopped doing it, of course, it popped up. So we have scorecards for racial justice on the Russell 1000, diversity, equity, inclusion, Russell 1000, on plastics, on pesticides, on CEO pay. So we have all these different scorecards. We're right now in the process of aggregating them all up into one database. So you'll be able to extract, I want to see what Apple looks like across 300 key performance indicators. We're in the process of that. We've actually just spun out a for-profit company called As You Know. We literally are just forming it. We're raising money. Actually, we're going to be doing a private placement to fund it. And it's aggregating all of the data, and we're going to be licensing this data into the marketplace. We just cut our first deal with a company called Exponents. They're using our racial justice and DEI data, and they've created separately managed accounts, but they're very high end for big pension funds and endowments, so $25 million minimums. And so we're going to start to license our data into investment vehicles and for research. And we're just making all kinds of deals because everybody needs good ESG data, and there's not a lot out there.
Well, that actually kind of ties into one question that's just come in, which is how does As You Sow make their money? You guys are a nonprofit, right? But it sounds like you're going into this deal with As You Know, whereby you're getting financing to develop it.
So we are, by the way, I just put in the chat, that's Invest Your Values. So you can go there and click on fossil-free funds or gender-free funds. They're all interwoven. So however you access it, it doesn't matter. So we're funded about 75% by foundations, and mostly family foundations, a range of different size foundations. And someone's not seeing things in the chat. And about 25% by individuals. And by the way, Bonnie, thank you for you keep saying, putting into people's minds you could donate as you so. Yeah, so just individuals. And that ranges from literally $25 on our website to people give us like, 6-figure gifts every year. So major donors and all kinds of different donors. And we're going to be having a 30th event this year, actually, at the Craneway Pavilion. We should invite you people, which is going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be like a giant, we're building like a whole state fair inside the pavilion, and it's called As We Grow. So anyway, so that's really how we do it. Now we're starting to make some revenue from licensing our data, but that's the first time we've ever done it. It's a new way to do it. As you vote, it's only about a year old, and that we also get some fees for that. So, but it's really, right now, these are just 2 new nascent ways, but it's really foundation grants. So we write about 50 foundation proposals a year and write about 50 reports. It's a lot of work. And then just individuals.
Okay, there are not a whole lot of extra questions coming in, but I have one I want to ask. So every now and then I'm like looking through some high-end magazine and I see this thing about you can donate to a charitable gift annuity and you get money from your donation. So why have I never heard of annuities before? I think it's because I'm too young at this point, but getting there all the time, getting closer. But I was wondering if either Bonnie or Patrick, if one of you would like to talk a bit about what a charitable gift annuity is and who qualifies and why one would want to qualify.
Bonnie, do you want to say anything about that?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say I'll defer to you. I think they look a lot like the charitable remainder trusts that I explained, where you make a gift and you receive an annuity back. But if Patrick, you want to talk more about the specific financial vehicle of the annuity, that's out of my area.
Well, I'm not an expert in this area. I do know a lot about regular annuities that people invest in through insurance companies of all different kinds. And in the old days, that was almost the only thing teachers could put their retirement money into. So a lot of retired teachers still have these old, they were called 403B retirement plans. And for quite a while, the annuity was about the only way to go. The insurance industry really grabbed a hold of that market and held on with tenacity until they finally opened it up to mutual funds. But going back to what Anne Christine just broached, the charitable annuity is simply where you make a charitable gift, and some of the tax benefits that you will enjoy are connected to what Bonnie's been talking about. You could take highly appreciated stock, and instead of selling it yourself and paying capital gains taxes, you can get credit for the full donation by giving that money to a charity. But when Anne Christine and I talked about this, she felt that it was really important to make a fundamental point, which is once you make a gift to a charity, the lump sum is gone. They have control of the lump sum, and all you have is a contract with them that they're going to make payments to you, presumably for your lifetime. Sometimes some of these annuity payout options can be rather complex. You can include a spouse so that as long as either one of you are alive, the payments continue. So there's all of that to consider. And also, you get a certain kind of a tax deduction. The IRS has some statistical tables that they use based on your age, how long they think you'll live, and they kind of apply this formula when you make your donation. And essentially, the older you are, the shorter your projected life expectancy. So the bigger a tax deduction you'll get, because the IRS will assume that there's more money left over after you're pushing up daisies somewhere, or maybe cremated if that's your preference. Can I just say one thing? I saw a question in the Q&A. Some very helpful person was suggesting that TIAA CREF, which is a giant retirement mutual fund organization, has the world's greatest bond funds. And I just want to say this is a perfect example of, and I'm trying not to be too snarky here, okay? It's hard for me because by nature, I'm a very snarky person. But inevitably, when it comes to investing, people think they know more than they actually do. I'm looking right now at Morningstar, and the TIAA CREF Core Bond Retail has 7.2% of the portfolio invested in fossil fuel industry related bonds. These funds hold hundreds and hundreds of bonds. And for example, the fracking industry has floated so many bonds, it's unbelievable. And they're high yield bonds. They pay a really high interest rate. So bond managers, if they're given, the boss will say, okay, I'll let you allocate 10% of this bond fund to high yield bonds, but be really careful, do your research. And they'll be very tempted to invest in some, fracking, could be pipeline company that basically would be bankrupt if they weren't able to raise money with a bond issue and pay a ridiculous interest rate like 7%, 8%. I'm not kidding, but that's what they have to pay you because you're taking a heck of a risk. So in these giant bond funds, you'll find bonds in there that are issued by corporations that are part of the fossil fuel industry. So never, ever accept the hype when a company tells you how great they are, how green they are. The whole industry is replete with greenwashing. There are ETFs, there are funds that in their name say ESG that have 7, 8, 9% exposure to the fossil fuel industry.
I'm going to have to pick up here because we just published a study that looked at 90 mutual funds and ETFs with ESG in their name, and 60 of them got a D or an F on our system for ESG. We did a study with UCSD on this where we tore apart their prospectus language, and we found that there was almost zero correlation of prospectus language to what was inside the mutual fund. Basically, everybody wants ESG, and so they didn't change the holdings, they just changed the name. And this has been rampant. Now, there are great funds out there that are ESG, that Trillium, that Green Century, that Domini, that all these folks. One thing that we have on our system, you can see if they're a US SIF member, US SIF. Generally, that's a trade association for socially responsible investing. And if the fund is a member, they tend to be much, much better. But I can tell you, so we did this whole study, it's up on our site, and we took it to the SEC. And I sat down with the SEC and said, look, this is a real problem. And they said, well, what do you want us to do? I said, well, we want to create a glossary of words. We want to know what low carbon means. We want to know what fossil free means. We have fossil free funds on our site with 80 fossil fuel companies in them, and fossil free funds that literally their name with 0 fossil fuels in them. And so it's just really buyer beware. That's one of the great things about our site is it's the only way you can see what's actually inside, because the names are meaningless. The prospectus language is meaningless, and the SEC knows it. And let me tell you, the only rule around naming a fund is it has to be 80% of whatever it says it is. So this was created so that if a large cap equity fund is 80% large cap equity, so there's 20% left over for cash and stuff, which makes sense. But now you could literally have a pharmaceutical free fund that's 19% Pfizer. The word free has no meaning. BlackRock put out the low carbon transition fund. 1.25 billion was invested the first day because everyone thought, oh, we're going to get climate risk reduction. Exxon, Chevron, Duke, Southern, pipeline companies. It's the business as usual fund. But if they named it that, nobody would have invested. So truly right now, again, we're in this big transition where the names have no meaning at all. They're not related to what's inside. I told the SEC, I said, if this was food and it said peanut free and I ate it and I ended up in the hospital, this is what's happening. It's like it says fossil free and it is just simply not. Sorry, that was a bit of a rant, but
that was a fantastic conclusion to this webinar.
Can I jump in, Mary Christine? I'm sorry to interrupt. There was one question that I just want to briefly answer.
Yeah.
Anonymous asks, is a trust amendment different than a trust restatement? And I just want to kind of touch on that because we like to use a lot of different terms in estate planning because it keeps you all confused, which keeps me in a job. So a trust restatement is a trust amendment. It's just a more comprehensive trust amendment. So if you had a trust that you set up in 1994 and you decided, I really need to update the whole thing, laws have changed, we would do a trust restatement, which is a brand new trust document, but keeps the original date. So it's a complete amendment of a document rather than just a simple 2-page amendment to a provision or two.
Okay, well, thank you for clarifying that.
I see a question. What were the initials for that?
I think they were talking about ESG.
Oh,
Could
ESG,
be
environmental, social, and governance. ESG. You'll see them a lot. That's the buzzword for socially responsible, but environmental, social, and governance is what that seems to be the acronym has been sticking lately. It's changed a
Right.
lot. It used to be SRI, socially responsible investing, etc.
But I appreciate your pointing out that so often the terms are not really aligned with the reality, which is kind of to the fundamental point of this whole webinar series and what inspired me to do it, which is that the ways in which our money is actually moving are opaque to us as consumers and as investors, that we think we're making certain kinds of choices. And it turns out that we're actually funding something completely different. So I really appreciate all the information you've provided today, which I think is going to be tremendously helpful for me and for other people to really get to the bottom of it so that I can make sure that I am actually investing in the things that I really care about, and I'm not accidentally giving more money to fossil fuel companies when that's not my intention. So that was just fantastic. I so enjoyed this webinar today. I'd like to thank Andrew and Patrick and Bonnie for being so generous with your time and expertise. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, the Marin Community Foundation, and most of all of you for attending today. I hope this webinar has given you too a deeper understanding of all the ways that you can use your money to support your values. And I hope you've got some ideas for actions you can take. Please talk to other people about what you've learned to inspire them to use their financial resources to support environmental issues. You can always share with them the emails I'm sending out after each webinar for details, resources, and a link to the recording so that you can re-listen and fully absorb the information, because we covered a lot today. And we covered a lot last week too. We've definitely packed a lot into just 2 webinars here, and it could take a while to unpack and to implement. I am still implementing, and I've been on this path for a couple of years now. But I'm hoping that you feel inspired to do that in your own life and inspired to lead others with your example. Never underestimate the value of your example when you talk to other people about what you're doing.